is Hot Takes, and I am Ashlee Marie Preston. And in this segment, we're going to be talking to someone who really needs no introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and give him that rundown. Today, we're going to be talking to the Chop Up podcast host, diversity and inclusion facilitator, social media edutainer, George Lee. And George is someone who believes in the model that education is elevation. We like that here. And he also believes that in the educational power of discomfort that deploys what he calls purposeful provocativeness that spurs critical engagement by pushing limits of perspective. As a proud Bryan, Texas native, George now seeks to share wisdom with others through his efforts of diversity inclusion training, teaching high school and college students, along with his seasoned experience as a public speaker and social media influencer. Welcome, George. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
You've been busy lately.
Yeah, I've been getting it in. I've been getting it in. You know, they say
you've been getting it in. Yeah, like you, and for those like who don't know, not only is it's one thing, social media is its own full-time job, but you're literally educating, teaching. We know that you have a master's in human relations and master's in education, and that you're the assistant director of the policy debate program at the University of Oklahoma. So when do you rest? Like, let's talk about that. Like, what does self-care for you look like?
Man, to be honest with you, these days I gotta figure out. I'm figuring out how to be able to get some time to myself and reflect and be able to make sure I ain't running myself into the ground. Since the quarantine has started, man, I didn't had pretty much all my little platforms and kind of exploded. So I'm getting used to this newfound people kind of trying to engage me and kind of reaching out to me. So I'm figuring it out, no cap.
Well, the good thing about your content is that not only are you talking about heavy hitting, hard conversations, but you're doing so using comedy as a medium. And so what led you to that place where you felt that it was much more impactful to include comedy in some of these teaching moments?
I know that most of the topics I get into are very taboo. So people already have an inherent discomfort from talking about it. And what I find is that if I'm able to sprinkle a little bit of humor, sprinkle a little bit of personalization in it, people are able to kind of be a little bit more vulnerable with me when they listen to me. And it seems like it's just better to sprinkle that in. And then I know when I walked on to the University of Oklahoma debate team when I was a freshman, I got always pigeonholed into being the angry black man. So I recognize if I smiled a little more, you feel me, it'll make my message interpreted a little bit differently, honestly. Now to stick that to social media.
It also makes it hard to kind of to gaslight you, essentially, right? Because we know that whenever we speak to our oppression, they meaning like the powers that be that continue to uphold these systems of anti-blackness, consistently try to put us in a position where they can demonize us. And so for those of you who are watching who may have never heard the term gaslight or gaslighting, can you describe that for us? Can you educate us on what that means for those who don't know?
Hey, when people trying to gaslight us, that's when they trying to play us into being a sucker. Well, we are thinking we are crazy in terms of talking about the oppression and the domination that we experiencing. So how I think about gaslight is literally me being on the internet talking about systemic oppression or anti-blackness or white supremacy, and somebody hit me with you are being a victim. This is textbook gaslighting. With literally are able to use manipulation in a way that you're able to ignore a reality. You feel me? It's almost it's literally what abusers do when they whooping on the ass of the person they abusing. They will gaslight the person that they're abusing and try to make them think that, hey, I didn't do that to you, or it's your fault that it's just happening to you, or it's just literally different ways to victim blame. That's kind of gaslighting, victim blaming go hand in hand like bacon and eggs.
Oh, one of the popular ones, stop it. I've never owned any slaves and you've never been a slave.
Hey, that one right there is funny because I just made a video that got way more engagement than I thought I was gonna get of this, this young white Republican, shout out to the young white Republicans. This woman said literally, I didn't, she said, I'm apologizing for being white. And she said, psych, because I didn't own any slaves and you wasn't a slave. And I just had to bring her back like, hey, peep game, man. Nobody asking you to apologize what your ancestors did. We asking you to help us dismantle the shit your ancestors left to you as a result to oppression. With that being said, I could think of at least 10 things off the top of my head right now that's happened since slavery that you benefit from. I named gerrymandering, the war on drugs, you feel me? Mass incarceration, like all this has happened since slavery. And then the last thing, I'm an educator, you know, I believe education is elevation. It's like, hey, peep game, man. If I don't know your history, I can't make it to the next grade. If you don't know my history, you're not penalized. This obviously shows that you benefit from this systemic racism, and obviously shows that we ain't got to go back to 17 whatever for me to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think that it's been an interesting conversation talking to people about what it means to dismantle systemic anti-Blackness, understanding that anti-Blackness and racism is systemic in and of itself. It's not about if you think I'm cool, if you like me, if you think I deserve, human rights or dignity or respect. It's about the fact that one group of people holds the keys to all of these systems that hold the resources and our ability to not only survive, but to thrive. And so I think that it's really been following. For those of you who aren't following, I suggest you follow George on TikTok and Instagram and any platform he has, because he breaks down sometimes in like 60 seconds or less these ideas that a lot of people have fear built up around. And so how did you start talking about racism, especially in a place like Oklahoma? Because I have been to Oklahoma before. I visited the Greenwood District, Black Wall Street.
Hey, shout out to Tulsa.
Yeah, the George Kaiser Family Foundation brought us out to like do a tour. And from what I understand about the culture there is that everybody knows what happened, especially with the, Black Wall Street bombings and the terror that took place in Tulsa. But it's almost like there's this tiptoe that's happening around race. And so how do you break through that?
I feel like I like to meet people where they at. And I know that a lot of people ain't read the stuff I done read or even care about stuff I've read. So I always think about it in terms of when I did policy debate. You know what I'm saying? When I was debating versus somebody versus Georgetown or Harvard or Yale or USC, wherever they came from, I would always think about it in terms of, if debate is about public education, can I say what you just told me publicly where I'm from? So how I think about it is, if I can't go back to my hood and explain it to my niggas in my hood, then I think that it's not that valuable. So I always try to make where I'm explaining to people, like in my mind, if education is elevation, I want to give you a college level course, which you never having to do an ACT or SAT and never having to enroll. I want to give it to you that way. And I think that in order for me to do that, I have to think about consciously how racism is embedded in a social fabric of America, and how, just like in Tulsa, everybody know in Tulsa what happened in, in Greenwood with the Tulsa Race Massacre. However, we understand that it's a taboo to talk about it. I think that same way is like America is structured that same way. We know the atrocities of anti-Black violence in America. However, we're conditioned to not speak about it and talk about it. And I think that because I know that I'm able to, I feel like borrow or get different contexts and be able to make it simple. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like systemic racism. Some people believe that it's saying that everybody in the system is racist, or saying that, if I can point out, George, can you show me a law that says we lock up Black people? Or can you show me a law that says this policy must be given to Black people more? Well, we know it's not. That's not what it's about. It's about the end result and how the system practice procedures lead to disproportionate impacts. We know that when Donald Trump is getting on Joe Biden's ass about the 1994 crime bill, you can't go to the plain text of 1994 crime bill and show where it says lock up Black people. But we can see the data or the impacts of it and seeing lock up Black people.
I think there you go. It froze for a second. That's absolutely correct. And for those two, I know that we touched briefly on the Tulsa Race Massacre. So can you just briefly touch on that for those who don't know the history there and the cultural significance of the massacre?
Definitely. We know that the Tulsa Race Massacre gets its uniqueness from The Greenwood District being one of the most affluent Black communities in the time of our country in the 1920s. This is when it happened. It was Black lawyers, Black businesses, Black banks, literally a affluent community that was flourishing with Black people, Black dollars, Black business folks. The issue became, we know that in the system of white supremacy, we know that Black progression is always met by white backlash. I want to repeat that. In the system of white supremacy, Black progression is always met by white backlash. When it comes to the historical understanding of Tulsa Race Massacre, we see that the Black progression of Black people being able to do what they want, being independent, politically, socioeconomically, made it where not only the citizens of Tulsa, we literally seen people in the city of Tulsa, people in the state of Oklahoma, and people also involved in the federal government of America involved with the bombing, burning down, terrorizing of Black people in Tulsa. And literally to this day, it used to be called the Tulsa Race Riots. They had illegally changed the Tulsa Race Massacre. And we know in terms of legal language, the words that we use are very important with how we speak truth to power. So if you're not familiar with the Tulsa things that happen on Tulsa, a research over me search, Google is your friend, slide over to Google, type in Tulsa Race Massacre, and go on and see. Don't take me and Ashlee word for it. You feel me? Education's elevation, elevate your damn self. You know what I'm saying?
And I think that it's important to know our history because stories like what happened in Tulsa, they basically prove this whole theory that Black people are lazy and we're uneducated and we just want handouts and we don't want to work and we don't want to. It challenges those notions. And so every single time, and it's not the first time, it wasn't only in Tulsa. Like I can't think of the city, it was like a few years, it's like almost a decade before that. But every single time that we've built up wealth, then it's been torn down or there have been systems put in place that prevent us from advancing. And so I think that's one of the most powerful things about watching your platform grow. And it's why I think it's important to name that you have a master's in human relations and a master's in education, because we know that education wasn't originally about elevation. It was about separation. It was about discrimination. It was about, being exclusive and creating this red tape and all this bureaucracy so that we couldn't take advantages of opportunities that white people disproportionately had access to. And so can you talk about what that journey has been like decolonizing academia? Because I know you talked about joining in debate and being a part of these conversations at other universities. And these are institutions, these are like legacy folks. Like this is like old money legacy, so what has that been like?
Man, I've been having to be conscious of respectability politics always. And when I say respectability politics, I'm talking about the literal desire for us oppressed peoples to always appeal to mainstream perspectives. So instead of us challenging values of mainstream, we just conform to mainstream. And what I found is being a young 29-year-old African-American from the west side of Bryan, Texas, that say, you feel me? And you know what I'm saying? I'm literally always, I feel like I'm always chastised for not conforming to respectability politics and being unapologetically Black. So I feel like when it comes to being in spaces and places that's dominated by white supremacy and particularly just white people in general, I have to always be mindful of what it means for me to speak my truth and how I'm situated. You know what I'm saying? Usually when you get to where I'm at in academia, they didn't already got you to cut your hair. They didn't already got you to speak like you know what I'm saying? Got to stick in. They didn't already figure out a way to kind of diminish the way that you're able to represent and perform your Blackness and your, you know what I'm saying, my identity. And what I find is that the higher I get, the more levels I get to, they say new levels, new devils, is like I find there are new ways in which I'm pushed into respectability politics. I said something wrong. I didn't say it the right way. I wasn't dressed the right way. They ain't like my hair. It's always something small that can make it where they can literally take legitimacy or credibility away from my work. And I'm just finding that, that's how I go down.
And we see this starting in high school. There was a couple of young folks who couldn't even walk across the stage and get their diploma because they had dreads. And we saw like a wrestler have his dreads cut. And like that kind of that kind of violence, essentially, right? Because we have to name it that. Sometimes people call it microaggressions. There is no microaggressions. They're all macro. Racism.
That was real right there.
And so, and the thing that I also realize is that it's important for us to show up in these spaces authentically and unapologetically, because the message that we're sending to young people is that we shouldn't have to shrink ourselves, any aspect of who we are. So I like that you talked about taking this education, but how can I take this knowledge and take it back to the neighborhood, to the homeboys, and say it in a way that someone who is directly impacted by these policies and forms of legislation, that they can understand it and that they can advocate for themselves without having to have a master's in political science just to be able to join the conversation.
Exactly. And I know for me, how liberating it was when I got into the activity of debate and I was able to say what I mean and mean what I say and being able to articulate myself. I think that once I learned the language to be able to identify and to be able to define particular phenomena, it made it where I was a force to be reckoned with. Now you can't get me on some whack high school shit where it's like, hey, George, you talked about black people being poor, but white people poor too. It's like, yeah, now I can get into class reductionism and get into the differences between poor black people and poor white people and how we are policed differently and how we get different access and different resources and different accessibility. So for me, when I'm making my content, I'm recognizing my man Huey P. Newton said that power is the ability to define the phenomenon and make it act in a desired manner. So I'm trying to give the homies, whether you straight, whether you gay, whether you gender non-conforming, black people in its totality, trying to give you a language to be able to speak truth to power, for you to be able to define that phenomenon and make it act in a desired manner. Because usually that's how we get played. We don't know how to I feel like have a language where we can kind of speak it. You know what I'm saying? And what I learned, last thing I say on this is that in college, I learned something about the grammars of suffering and how the grammars of suffering for black people is damn near unintelligible. There's literally no grammars to be able to articulate the suffering that black people have been through. And that's one of the slippages that we have when we're trying to talk about our realities as being black people. And what I found is the more language I learned, the more I was able to be felt.
Yeah, well, I think language is important because it gives us an on-ramp into having our experiences affirmed. You know, language helps us describe those experiences. It makes them very real, especially like we're talking about being in a world where we're constantly being gaslit. But I also want to talk about the willingness to absorb information, because you were talking about taking some of these ideas, you know, back to the homies and them like absorbing it and being able to get with it. But they don't want all the information. You know, we talk about liberation, but we know that there's liberation in information and education and all of those things. And so when it comes to feminism, you know, as a Black cis hetero man, one of the things that I feel has made you so popular, and it's really like blown up your presence, has been your willingness to talk about Black liberation in a way that observes intersectionality. And for those, again, you know, we're using a lot of language. Intersectionality describes multiple threats of discrimination when an individual's identity overlaps with multiple marginalized groups. The term was coined in 1989 by a Black woman by the name of Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. She's phenomenal. She's still a professor at UCLA. And these experiences, I believe, have been what is holding us back, because when we say Black Lives Matter, we often don't acknowledge that all Black lives matter. So talk about what that realization was like, because I feel often we don't talk about what the journey was like. So we get a couple of brothers that jump out and it's like, oh, dang, like he's woke and he's doing this, but it's a journey. Like, so what was that on-ramp for you like? Getting to that place where you realize all Black lives matter, just to clarify.
For me, I think that it came from when I first got into college debate and I was walking around with my fist and talking about Black power this and Black power that. And then I would get hit from, I would be engaged by older Black people, specifically older Black men. Shout out to Davon Love of Baltimore. Shout out to Ignacio Evans of Baltimore. Shout out to Adam Jackson of Baltimore. And they were always, I felt like when I first got into debate, about 19, they hit me with some shit like, can you say you for your people if there are people amongst you that don't like you? It was something like that, right? And I just thought about what it means for me to be against oppression in every instance, and also being conscious about how I'm implicated in oppression. Really, the book that did it for me was When Chicken Heads Come Home and Roost. I think her name is her name is Joanne. The author of it's like Joanne something. But she wrote this book and she was like she was talking about feeling like she was a slave of a slave. And that just, I remember being 20 years old, sitting in an African-American women's course taught by an African-American woman. You feel me? And she said literally that Joanne and this when chicken heads come home to roost, this kind of hood feminist analysis. And she said literally that she felt like a slave of a slave. And for me, somebody that looked up to Huey P. Newton, looked up to Bobby Seale, looked up to Stokely Carmichael, it made me reflect on what it means for me to be against oppression, but also be implicated in somebody else's oppression. You feel me? And I feel like as a gender black man, I think it's easy for me to always think about my masculinity, think about my straightness and how my masculinity and my straightness allow for me to feel like I'm targeted. You know what I'm saying? It's harder for me to think about how I get in the way politically, socially, economically, in a way that Black women are able to perform their femininity and able to progress. It's also, you feel me, very easy for me to be like, oh, the LGBT community trying to emasculate me, the white man, X, Y, and Z. It's harder for me to figure out how me individually is implicated in that. So for me, it was literally thinking about, okay, if you're against the oppression, where is the parameters of it? And I just felt like every day I wake up, I should be trying to be better and thinking about how I'm implicated in heteronormativity as well as misogyny. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I can't say I'm a real freedom fighter. I can't say I'm a real revolutionary. I can't say I'm a real activist if I'm not thinking about how my Black disabled people are positioned, if I'm not thinking about how Black trans people are positioned, if I'm not thinking about how Black gender non-conforming people, you know what I'm saying? I think that I can't really be real with that shit if I'm just taking my pro-Black stuff and I'm just basically making it white supremacy and blackface. Because white supremacy also operates on a norm that say that, hey, the way this Black person expresses themselves is not good. Therefore, they are exposable and disposable, and we should give a damn about them. And I think that is white supremacy. So I think that I can't call myself to be pro-Black if I'm using the white supremacist notions to disregard or disavow people in my own community. With that being said, shout out to everybody of the Black LGBT, shout out to everybody that's Black in the LGBT community, as well as the Black people that's in the disabled community, as well as Black people that's in the hood, as well as Black people that's in the middle class. I recognize the multiplicity of Blackness and Black people, and white supremacy wants us to be a monolith, wants us to be in a little bitty ass box. They don't want us to recognize the multiplicity of our beauty, the multiplicity of our greatness. And I think I'm on that shit. That's what I care about.
Well, when is the TED Talk? That's what we care about. We want to know when the TED Talk is. We want to know.
Hey, Ted, Ted, people holler at me, man. GeorgeLeeSpeaks.com when you holler at me.
That is so on the money. And I like how you talk about the ways in which you were talking about these notions of Blackness and expecting us to perform those as a means of like, I think Asanya Renee Taylor, she talks about enacting white supremacy against one another. And that's what it is, because when we think about these notions of like gender and, femininity, masculinity, most of that didn't exist in indigenous culture, whether it's in Africa and, the Caribbean, none of that it wasn't until we were taken captive and there was like colonialism and all of these ideas, because it was about survival. So if we are a race that is, barely surviving, okay, we need our women to look this way and act this way so that we can have structure and order, so that we can make sure y'all pop out the babies we need, so that we can train up. And that's the thing about white supremacy is I've even said before, if I even had an ounce of the public relations that white supremacy does, that is the most, when you think about the PR campaign behind white supremacy and the ways
impeccable.
It's how do you come from nothing and then you take all the continents, all of the it's wild. But getting back on track though, I like that you talk about there was so much there, but I think again, going back to this idea that it's all Black Lives Matter, because often we say that we want to dismantle systems of anti-Blackness, but we actually want to access it. We want to access the benefits of white supremacy. We don't want to challenge it, or we don't want to eradicate it. We want to access it. And so how have you been able to unpack that to, you know, people in the community, you know, who say like, I understand that, but that ain't got anything to do with us, you know, like that's, you know, Black men are getting shot, you know, which now we know, especially after Sandra Bland and all of these examples of Black women who've also been murdered by law enforcement. How have you been able to break through and talk about intersectionality and the importance of seeing all Black lives?
I feel like I think I've been able to check into some of the tropes and values of the people I'm talking to. Like, for instance, I know I'm talking to my people in the hood. We care about things being street, being gangster, being real. So I'm going to characterize what I'm talking about in terms of intersectionality as being street, as being gangster, as being real. And in my mind, it's like if you are going against if you're going against the literature or going against the framing of intersectionality, that's whack. You know what I'm saying? So how I find it is being able to speak to people's ethics and morals. What I find is that most people try to be ethical and moral, and what they and how you're able to catch them up or expose the way they're being unethical or immoral is being able to literally go straight to it. So I think on an ethical level, we're able to recognize that should nobody get their ass whooped because of who they are or because of how they identify, especially when it comes to race, class, gender, or sexuality. So I find it easy for me to talk about when Ayanna Taylor got whooped in Minnesota and dudes was misgendering her and this, that, and the other. It's like, fam, that's not real. That's not gangster, bro. You don't get no street cred for whooping on this woman. And even if you want to misgender her and say it's a nigga in a dress, you definitely don't get no cool points for that either. So it's a double bind. Either whichever way you want to orient and interpret what happened to this young woman, you out of line, you out of pocket. You know what I'm saying? And just being able to, I feel like characterize in ways. Yeah, it's literally
it's fear-based. You know, a lot of when we feel the need to dominate, which is really what it's about dominance. It's stemming from fear, and it's typically fear that we will never have enough or that we will never be enough. And I think that, can you speak to that a little bit? Like, if you agree with that,
plantation patriarchy, that's what I call it, plantation patriarchy. So you said some shit like, you know, some people, to me, that's how I think about it. It was some slaves that wanted to dismantle the plantation. It was other slaves that wanted to just merely be on top of the plantation. You feel me? It's some people that want the crown of the king. It's some people that want the head of the king. You know what I'm saying? It's a whole bunch of Black men I know that they really ain't got no problem with the white man do. They mad they can't do what the white man do. And that's what I mean by plantation patriarchy. For me, I think that once you start defining yourself based off your ability to dominate somebody, that's what we start getting into the unethical, immoral shit. And what I find when it comes to specifically gender and sexuality, most of us cisgender heterosexual people, we cling to being able to dominate people that deviate outside of being straight or being cis because we find something to cling on to. Like, well, I might be a Black man, but at least I ain't Black and gay. At least I ain't Black and trans. And you know what I'm saying? I find that literally being structured by domination or wanting to reinform a hierarchy. It's like, hey, man, as long as I ain't at the bottom of the hierarchy and we good. You hear that, Black trans women? And I think that that's usually why I'm able to get to the morals and the ethics. Because it's easy to stick at the bottom, but it's like, hey, in order for you to be at the top, somebody got to be at the bottom. We already know how I feel at the bottom. The question is, are you like when you reciprocate it, is you cool with that? Is you cool with somebody feeling with politically, socially, economically the feelings that we have from being at the bottom? Is you cool with that? If you're cool with that, then damn, you go see a therapist or something. But if you're not cool with that, let's do something about it.
And it's divide and conquer, essentially, because we know that we can't effectively organize and, you know, rally people together. Like prime example, I've spoke at a couple of Black marches, and most of us don't know that the first Black person to testify before a congressional committee was a former Black trans slave by the name of Francis Thompson during the 1866 Memphis riots. And when they was down there wearing us out and hanging us from everything they could because they lost the Civil War, it was a Black trans woman that rallied up a couple of other women and went and testified and blew the whistle, essentially, to make them come down here and do something about it. And sadly, they punished her for it. They basically used her gender identity against her, said that it was Reconstruction propaganda, threw her, they assigned her to a chain gang for 10 years, and she died of dysentery. So the thing is that this idea of different expressions of Blackness is not new. We're not a monolith. Like, it's not new. What is new is going back to your point about subscribing to these respectability politics that are authored by entities and institutions that have never respected us.
Yeah.
There is nothing you can do to win favor with white supremacy. There's nothing you can do. Your mere existence is an anomaly and is an irritant. Like, it gets under the skin of white supremacy. And so when we're talking about white supremacy, again, for those like who may be watching from all over the place, we're not just talking about white people. We're talking about systems that none of us chose to be born into. We just were.
Wow.
Like, you don't pick and choose, you know. And so how did you think about using social media? So I think what's interesting about Gen Z and millennials is that with the age of social media, there's a lot more noise, but there's a lot more opportunity to lean into the nuances. And so when did you get the idea to use social media as a vehicle of, the messages that you're helping unpack?
Man,
because most people post food pictures, maybe a little outing.
My daughter was born. I think that my daughter, 4 years old right now. She was born, June 2nd in 2016. About like 3 weeks after my daughter was born, that's when I started thinking about the things that I knew, things that I know, and how, and me being able to utilize social media in a way that was effective and that was meaningful. And I think that after my daughter was born, I just thought about all the things I had been told about myself and how I could maybe start to do something with it. So in my mind, I thought about it in 2016, like the average American be on their phone for like 5 to 8 hours a day. With that being said, majority of them already have content curators and particular types of content they're looking for. There's no reason why people don't get on their phone and think. Like, you think about what the Shade Room posted. You think about what the ESPN posted. You think about what that blog person posted. In my mind, I thought about it like, well, shit, there's no reason for people to open their phone and think, I wonder what Consciously, AKA George Lee, AKA whatever you want to call me, is thinking. So I started thinking about it in terms of like capitalism. I think capitalism sucks. I think it's a dehumanizing system, but I recognize it's a system that I have to survive and thrive in if I want to be able to live. You feel me? It's like there were slaves that said that the plantation life sucked, but they did not just sit in the cabin and cry because, the plantation sucked. They still had to survive. With that being said, I thought about it like, man, if I can create a demand for content, I think that I have a whole bunch of things that I can fulfill in terms of supplying. And I think that once I started being more consistent and posting, it's like I thought about like Lil Wayne 2006, or really what it was. I seen a DaBaby. That nigga DaBaby did it's funny, but I seen an interview with DaBaby. He had a little afro, DaBaby now rock them little fades. So I knew the video was older because he had the little fro. He said something like this: when it comes to this rap shit, you either got it or you don't. And I believe I got it. So for the next 9 months, I don't care nothing about them likes. I don't care nothing about them views. I don't care nothing about them shares. I don't care nothing about them comments. I'm just gonna drop my shit. And I think I took that mentality of think like, man, I believe I have something important to say that's meaningful that people should hear. I think that the only way for me to be able to do it is to be able to drop it and put one foot in front of the other. I really feel like, opportunity or luck is when opportunity meets preparation. It's just like, I'm gonna be prepared. I'm gonna have all this content, and I just, seeing it that way. And then, but something I also want to say, what you were just saying though, is that everything we talking about is a social construct. So when you talk about how indigenous peoples prior to European engagement, they thought it would be in 4 genders and 5 genders, and they didn't gender their kids, so they was 4 and 5. These are social constructs. What this means is that if we go to a different society, they're gonna construct gender and sexuality differently. When I say respectability politics, we are literally always already conforming to the white understandings of this binary understanding of gender and sexuality that make it where we believe that the way that gender is constructed now is natural because it's been normalized. Tomorrow, when I'm getting into the Lost in the Sauce lecture series, and I'm talking about the unconscious consciousness of homonegativity, we're gonna get specifically into people, how they correlate normalization with naturalization, and they be lost in the sauce and thinking that what is normalized is what's natural, and them two things is not the same thing. You feel me? And I think that when we talk about social constructs, it's important to think about how, if we go to a different time in history, to a different society, we're gonna have a different construct. America is not immune to this.
Yeah, even I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and she's from the Middle East. And so she was talking about that, like what here we would say is, oh, that's gay or that's that. The men don't really get to socialize with the women unless that's your wife, unless that's bae. So it's nothing to see men holding hands, hugging each other, giving each other a kiss on the cheek. But if you were to say you were gay, they would like you would get killed. You would get and so like it's just like really
Performance.
interesting all these complexities that like we have around again like what the expectation is and so I think that's when we move into the conversation around agency and like what it means to have full autonomy of one, and especially as it pertains to women. And so I kind of want to talk about that because I also see that we just had an incident recently, or we witnessed an incident with Megan Thee Stallion and everything that she went through as a Black woman, and just seeing the ways in which it's almost this, there's a couple of pieces there. I want to break that down and kind of mince it up a little bit. So one is this demonization of Black femme sexuality without ownership. So as long as our sexuality is a commodity and it can be commodified and it can be, profit can be made, it's all good. But the minute that we take ownership and we take pride in our own bodies, in our own sexuality, in our own, then we're called every name in the book, A to Z, people. And then when things happen to us that shouldn't happen to us, no matter what, people jump out the woodwork saying, well, maybe if you didn't dress like that, maybe if you didn't act like that, maybe if you didn't talk like that, maybe if you weren't out jogging at this time of night. So how have you felt about that conversation taking place lately?
I hate to say it like this, but the settler has taught us well. White supremacy has taught us well. The very tactics that we get pissed off that they use against George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Eric Garner and Trayvon Martin is the same tactics that they will literally display against Black women. We have to wait till all the facts come around. We have to get all sides. Well, they would have complied. Well, if she wouldn't have, to me, it just showed that what I'm saying, white supremacy and blackface, people will literally deploy the same tactics that's used to justify Black violence when it is to man. They'll do it blindly when it is, anti-Black violence towards the women. And what I find is that it's easy to me. I think that it's like conditioning. You feel me? Like norms is about conditioning. And I think that we are conditioned to talk about women being fucked. I'm sorry, Target and AFROPUNK. I'm drop some F-bombs real quick. But I think that when it comes to thinking about agency, specifically when it comes to women, especially Black women, it is okay to talk about Black women being fucked.
Well, yeah, you talked about it recently in one of your posts when everybody was going in about WAP, Cardi and Megan's WAP. And so people were like, oh, that's just, all of this. And you did a video showing all these different songs that people have said that have talked about. Can you touch on that, on your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think that all oppression is structured on contradictions or exceptions, I should say. And we see that the respectability politics that was deployed against Meg Thee Stallion and Cardi B was not consistent when it comes to talking about like literal sexual desires. So we can literally talk about bitches ain't shit but hoes and tricks and slob on my knob to corn on the cob and get on your knees, literally all type of very explicit graphic things about women being fucked. But going to that binary, it seems as if it's something about women claiming agency and talking about doing the fucking. And that's what I find in terms of sexual agency, specifically when it comes to Black women. In our rap music, we can talk about Black women being objects and being hoes and nymphos and thoughts and sluts and all that there. But as soon as city girls talk about, run a nigga down, it's like you got an issue with it. And I think that's like, I think it's the plantation patriarchy again.
Well, because women aren't allowed to be seen as alpha also. And I feel like you were briefly talking about that. There was a post you did recently that you shared a TikTok video. It was about women with deep voices. and it was talking about, and these were cisgender women, and
Mhm.
talking about, you know, some of these like different like things that they hear and expectations that people have of them. And it really got me thinking about just in general, like the fact that women are expected to be docile and expected to be, you know,
Passive and delicate and
mhm.
and can't be touched. And we see that when it comes to Black women, specifically when it comes to like these random, like I feel like a lot of the generic understandings of what it means to be woman, we see that usually they don't apply to Black women the same. So what I find is that when Black women talk about being sexually violated, we see the history of Black women being seen as sexual nymphos being perpetuated. I think that if we talk about
Young girls, even like the ways in which a 10-year-old, you know, is treated like she has the ability to give consent, or like she somehow, I've seen it, it's a wild thing, like where they actually demonize young girls and like blame them. But then like a white woman at any age, it happens, you know, it's just like
see, listen, when you and I get off this video, right? I'm about to go make me a little 2-minute video because I'm irritated with the homies. You know what? They ain't, some of them ain't my homies. I don't even want, because some of them ain't my homies. I'm tired of people, period, saying consciously because you advocate for the LGBT community, you are advocating for pedophilia. I'm about to make a video when we get off of this, right? That's why I'm bringing this up. That's why I'm bringing this up. The same people that are trying to inscribe pedophilia onto the LGBT community and say that's the reason why we shouldn't rock with them is the same people that advocate for R. Kelly and Harvey Weinstein to be free. What I find is that the autonomy for people to be able to act as they desire is usually from a fallacious heteronormative standpoint, where instead of you just being real and saying you don't like the LGBT community, you will inscribe pedophilia onto that community and saying, hey, this is a legitimate reason why we should X out this entire community. When it comes to this idea of us talking about like women and like cisgender women being able to, I feel like, access some, you know, some sexual liberation, I think that it's something to talk about in terms of how Black men, Black community will internalize these respectability politics and internalize these understandings of Black inferiority and say, Black women, because you are trying to politically and socially, economically own how your sexuality is performed and manifested, you bad. I think it's literally like white supremacy. I know I said a lot of words right there. I apologize, but listen, man, it's white supremacy.
No, we're keeping up. We're keeping up. And I think ultimately that's what it boils down to. When we talk about supremacy, it's not just white supremacy. Supremacy is global. Supremacy is, it's what we talked about, the need to think that, yeah, like we're all Black, but you're LGBTQ, or we're Black, but you're not a respectable Black woman because you had kids at a wedlock, or because like you got X amount of baby daddies, or because, you know, you dress like this, you pop it like this, you twerk, you do all of these. In fact, even when I think about like my own role in politics, it has been one of the reasons why I go back and forth as to if I want to engage those spaces, because I don't want to have to code switch. I don't want to have to, again, come across, create this stuffy, dry, flaky persona to be able to speak to issues that impact me directly, so I can be deemed a valuable contributor to the space. And so like, I think again, when we talk about anti-Blackness, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, they're acts of white supremacy.
See, yeah, that's it. See, I think that getting into my philosophical bag a little bit, the Western world is really structured by the Aristotelian binary logic. You feel me? Literally, we don't define things as far in opposition. I'm explaining what I mean. I'm explaining what I mean. You know, Aristotle, the white man, you feel me? The father of Western philosophy created a binary: up, down, white, Black, cold, hot, man, woman, straight, gay. These are all Aristotelian binaries. These are all binary logics that the Western world is structured by. I think when we talk about white supremacy, it's not just with terms of race, but it's literally how European settlers brought entire cultural understandings to the Western world. So it wasn't just about race. They brought understandings about class, understandings about gender, understandings about sexuality, and they kind of forced on to people. So I'm talking about social constructs. It's important to think about how us always thinking about power as being binary. You have powerless people, you have powerful people. You have men and you have women. These are all the ways in which I believe we're able to perpetuate how power and supremacy not only works around us, but works through us. And when I say us, I'm talking about everybody: white, black, straight, gay, poor, disabled, everybody.
Yeah, I've had that conversation as a, trans woman, even that, like, I recognize that I have privilege as someone, like when I wash my face and take all the whatever off, I can walk down the street and be less visibly trans than some of my peers. And when I transitioned, I remember other trans women weaponizing that against trans folks who were more visibly trans. And so again, like when you look at these like sub communities and the ways in which we function, I think I just go back to when you were talking about that book, When the Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost, like being the slave of a slave. I will never forget that. Like that
hit my heart.
Really
hit my heart. Like, damn.
Because in my mind, it's like, we know how bad that hurts. We know the impact of that. We know the psychological damage that does. So why would we in turn enact that upon someone else? But so my question to you is, for the person who's at that space where they're like, okay, I admit, even if they don't admit it publicly, behind closed doors, when they're with themselves, having that moment of reflection, what are some healthy steps for someone who's willing to interrogate the ways in which they enact anti-Blackness and white supremacy toward other people to follow? Like, what would you suggest to someone who wants to begin confronting that?
I think that I would suggest you getting into the knowledge of self-care, self-love, self-understanding, self-awareness. Like, who are you? What piss you off? What make you mad? What make you sad? What make you happy? What make you cry? What make you feel motivated? What make you hungry? Also, who are you though? Like, what is your cultural, ethnic, gender, sexual identity? Like, who are you? I think that once you're able to have a knowledge of self, you're able to better understand how you're positioned in the world and how you're implicated in other people's shit. What I got from one of my I guess OG philosopher people that I look up to, by the name of Dr. George Yancey. He's now a philosopher. He's now a professor of philosophy at Emory University. He used to be at Pittsburgh. He's talking about this idea of being a anti-racist. And how I would explain to that, you feel me, is being an anti-sexist. You feel me? Like, as a matter of fact, I would say, they say the first step into fixing a problem is admitting you have a problem. AFROPUNK, my name is George Lee, aka Conscious Lee, and I have a problem with sexism. I'm an anti-sexist. This means that I'm against sexism in every way, shape, form, or fashion, and also recognizing I've read a whole bunch of literature insofar of sexism and feminism. I know a lot about the first wave feminism and second wave feminism and third wave feminism and black feminism and Chicano feminism. I know all about that shit, but I cannot allow for my knowledge of feminism and sexism to make it as if I cannot be sexist. So I'm gonna stay implicated in my position of being a cisgender heterosexual male and being able to acknowledge that every day I wake up, it don't matter what I read if I went to sleep, I'm still gonna be interpreted as a cisgender heterosexual male based off performance and presence. And I should always be held accountable for how I'm positioned in the world. What that means is, if a woman come to me or a feminine body come to me telling me how I'm implicated in misogyny or patriarchy, I don't say, shut up, woman, I read sexism. You don't know what you're talking about. I shut my mouth and I think about very genuinely, very consciously reflect on what they're telling me and what I'm doing. So when I say I'm an anti-sexist, I'm not saying that I believe in sexism. What I'm saying is I believe I'm still implicated within systems of sexism. And it's not stamped on my forehead. You see my forehead? Y'all see my forehead? My forehead does not say that I've read first wave feminism. You feel me? My forehead does not say that I know Kimberly Crenshaw created intersectionality. With that being said, what am I doing? What am I doing to acknowledge, but also not only acknowledge, to deconstruct how I'm implicated within sexism? And with that being said, to all my straight black men, to all my straight cisgender black men, instead of when you hear criticism about what black men is doing and you say, not all of us, ask yourself, what are you doing as an individual to make it where this criticism about niggas doing wild shit, whether it's doing foul, immoral things to black women, or it's doing foul, immoral things to people of the black LGBT community. What are you doing as an individual to make it where it's not all of us? They say only a hit dog holler. If the shoe fits, then don't worry. But if it don't apply, let it fly. Black men, straight cisgender black men. If you got an issue with anything I done said in this whole interview or anything I done said ever on camera, my question to you is, what are you doing about it? It was on my mind. So I had to say that. That was that. I had to lean into that. Like that.
No, it's important because I think it's important to name that we're not responsible for dismantling systems we didn't create. The same conversation that we're having with white people around racism and white supremacy, it also applies to sexism and misogynoir and trans misogynoir. And furthermore, I think it's important to name that if your feminism only extends toward the women that you want to sleep with, it's trash. Feminism shouldn't be only about the women that you think, are attractive, or the ones that, you feel are respectable, or the ones, we see this conversation a lot. I've seen people who were like, oh, look, I'm an intersectional feminist, but they shit on sex workers and strippers, or like exotic dancers, exotic laborers, or like all this. And it's like, how does that work? Like, how does that?
Don't make it make sense. Make that make sense. Literally, yeah. So many thoughts right there. So what
do you want this conversation to look like by the time your daughter's 18 years old? Like what is your hope for how this conversation and dialogue evolves around feminism and essentially how we treat Black women?
Man, for me, I think it's about what you just said, making it where people don't inform their respect for women based off of their attraction to women. And for my mind, it's like, will my daughter be able to live her truth in terms of being able to say what she mean and mean what she say, and not being chastised or gaslit, or, making it where she has to stick to these very misogynistic standards of what it means to be a woman. My daughter will also, so my daughter light skinned, you feel me? So I'm also thinking about how colorism operates within our community, and specifically thinking about how I know that when my daughter walk into certain places and spaces, folks gonna break their neck to see her, because I know how we're conditioned to be able to recognize light-skinned women. In my mind, it's like, will my daughter be, in my mind, I need to be able to teach my daughter what it means to be light-skinned, but also thinking about what that means for dark-skinned women and dark-skinned men. And also thinking about what it means for my daughter to be able to live her truth and being a woman without thinking about, these other things. And then being real too, also thinking about if my child is not my daughter and my child is, trans, my child, both of my kids, being able to live in the truth where they ain't got to worry about these psychological impacts of not being able to say who they is and live who they is because of all these standards. Right now, it's 2020. My child is 4 years old and 2 years old. I got about 15 years, you feel me, to try to figure some shit out. But in my mind, it's like, okay, if my son, Zane, say, Daddy, I don't really like Zane. I don't really go by Zane. I don't feel like I'm Zane. You know what I'm saying? In my mind, it's like, can my family members and my community embrace my son or embrace my child and not do them how, how Zaya getting done with Dwayne Wade, child? In my mind, it's like, what is me as a father, as a cisgender heterosexual man? How can I make sure that, like, how can I contribute to making where Zaya Wade can live her truth and ain't got to worry about no sucker shit? Now, we know some of the sucker shit gonna be inevitable. The question is, what can I do about what's around me? And it's like, hey, if my kids come out to be another way, can they be able to live that and not have to go through a whole bunch of psychological trauma and psychological, That's what I think.
And I think that ultimately, when we start thinking that way, when we think about when the most vulnerable among us are liberated, all of us will be. I think that that's the way that we have to see it, because it's one of those things that, again, like recognizing privilege and understanding that it's not a dirty word. It's not There's nothing accusatory about it. So when Black women are saying to Black men, you know, like, yes, we understand, we know that we see the hurt. Like, we're out there marching, we're out there rallying, we're out there, you know, even the conversation around like, oh, well, Black Lives Matter, you know, like that's, you know, LGBTQ stuff. 2 of the 3 women who founded it are queer. Like, you know what I mean? So it's just like, we have to stop. It's one thing to honor experiences under the Black umbrella and throughout the Black diaspora.
Right.
It's another to completely withhold or withdraw our support and solidarity because of how someone else's Blackness shows up next to ours. And I think that's next wave Black liberation. That's what it looks like. Really quick, I want to close out with, you talked about and a lot of things you were saying about, like, in that moment of reflection, who am I? What am I about? What do I stand for? What makes me happy? I had to pause there for a moment because happiness and joy is something that Black folks weren't talking about before a couple of years ago. Now we got a hashtag for it, Black Girl Magic, all of this, but especially as it pertains to Black men and boys or Black masculine folks. And so when I think of joy, it's such an important element because joy is an act of resistance. When you think about oppression and what it's meant to do, it's meant to shatter you from the inside out, you know, and damage or destroy any idea that you have of what true happiness can look like or what it means to be whole. It's to break you down so you will never know wholeness. And so I think of, you know, this idea, even as activists, even as educators and truth tellers, there's this idea that we have to subscribe to this martyrdom in order to prove how serious we are about doing the work. So can you just kind of talk about what your journey has been and as a Black man accessing joy and happiness and allowing yourself to show that, to express that extrinsically, and then there'll be a part B. I'll follow up with a part B.
Part A, I'm thinking of shout out to Drake and Nicki Minaj. I wish that I can have this moment for life. Remember the song, right? Mm-hmm. They had a part in that song that hit me, you know what I'm saying, right here in the heart. They both said, everybody dies, but not everybody lives. Everybody dies, but not everybody lives. To me, joy is about having a value to life and recognizing that there are some people that are existing and there are some people that are existence. Everybody dies, but not everybody lives. I think that when it comes to cisgender Black men, feel me, living our truths, it's important for us to be able to find what the Afro-pessimists call social life and social death. You know what I'm saying? It's like we can't be always in survival mode. And I think that it has to be, we have to think very critically about what are the things that we're able to sacrifice when we're in survival mode. See, being from the country, I grew up around a whole bunch of sayings. They say drastic times call for drastic measures. If you always in drastic times, you're gonna always be in drastic measures. That's gonna definitely impact how you are able to express joy and happiness. To me, when Nicki Minaj and Drake say that everybody dies, but not everybody lives, you gotta ask yourself, all of us gonna die, but do you have a value to life? Are you living? And I think that asking that question is gonna force you to think about joy and happiness and how do you subscribe your value to life?
And how does it exist outside of capitalism? That's an important piece.
That's the hey, that right there, man. You know, we a few weeks from an election, and when I tell you, man, it's so many of the homies that got me mad about how they lost in the sauce of capitalism, and how a lot of them literally define their happiness and joy based off of what they're able to possess in the system of capitalism. You know, that old Platinum Plus plan, Ice Cube and them got a lot of dudes like going wild, like, oh, we getting the bag. This is the last thing I say on that right here, man. In order for you to get that bag right, you got to have your mind right. You know what I'm saying? Mental health is wealth. Ain't no way in order for you to get that bag right if your mind ain't right. With that being said, I think that a lot of us need to kind of get into some therapy. We need to normalize being able to explore what's in our minds and really think about how a lot of us define our joy and our happiness based off of what's in our pocket or based off of the access that we have to capitalist systems. If we know the capitalist system inherently devalues blackness and black people, why must we define our happiness based off this system that literally is defined in opposition to us? Capitalism, I think I'm gonna win. I'll beat anybody's ass on this right here. Anybody listening to this want to take me up on this debate, I will kick anybody's ass that capitalism is structured by anti-blackness.
Of course. Well, the country was built, like when you think about genocide and slavery and the fact that there were hundreds of years of free labor, and even when we talk about law enforcement and police and all of that, they were there to protect property. Black people were property. So how do you figure out a way to, I guess, like salvage, damaged property, because liberation and freedom was damaging to that like model. And so then it became the prison industrial complex, then it became, all of these other things. And so thank you so much for really touching on that, because I think that as we're experiencing a dual pandemic, health, race, all of these different things happening right now, it's important to try to like reimagine what things can look like beyond this point. I think that there's this major cultural shift in consciousness happening right now. And I think that this is a time where we can do a cultural reset. And I don't even mean just like as Americans or people, but as humans, but really as Black folks. What are our values? What is it that we truly stand for? What is it that we want our legacy to be? What is it that, are we making that vision wide enough and big enough to include all aspects of Blackness, to include all forms of expression, to include, I just think about how brilliant, and powerful and just like majestic we are, you know what I mean? And just, it's almost like, I can't even think of a metaphor for it. It's just one of those things where it's almost like if you were to get a brand new paint job and then just leave the car sitting in the driveway with a tarp over it through winter, through like all the seasons. Like, it's like, why would you not want to show the beauty and complexity of culture? And so I think that this conversation, hopefully for those of you who are watching, is a good jumping off point for you to unsubscribe from these notions of what it means to be worthy, of what it means to be deserving, of what it means to have dignity. And not, I think that dignity and respect is an inalienable right that all of us should be able to experience. And I think that if you find yourself in a position justifying anti-Blackness toward one of us, it's counterproductive to your message that we matter. And they will weaponize against us every single time. Where can they follow you on social media, and where can we get into this debate that's going to happen later?
Man, you can follow me at The Consciously on all social media platforms. That's TheConsciously, Lee, The Consciously on all social media platforms. And you know what, man? Because I don't really fool with the conservative hype house. That's where it's gonna be at. Man, you're gonna be able to catch the debate later on tonight or in the morning on my YouTube page, the Consciously YouTube page. You feel me? We don't want to get the conservative hype house too many streams and views, though that's what they obviously doing. Shout out to the conservative clout chasers, though, man. When I talk about the multiplicity of Blackness and Black people, even though y'all a little lost in the sauce, Black conservatives, believe it or not, I'm also accounting for y'all too.
That's deep. That's a conversation even that I was seeing somebody had not long ago when Candace Owens was at this, there was this political panel and they were dragging her, and I don't know if it was Diddy or somebody.
Yeah, Killer Mike. It was
yeah, yeah, like they were like going in and
they want to put it on. Yeah.
And they were just kind of being like, like, yeah, she's kind of, but still, we have to still be able to hold space. And that's uncomfortable. Like, I think, again, we have to find comfort in our discomfort. We just have to get to that place where we realize that if it were easy, it would have been done. you know? And so like, I think when we talk about the next wave of what it means to be pro-Black, looks like not throwing each other away. It looks like restorative justice. It looks like having conversations that challenge us and that allow us to push back and go through these growing pains, but not, you know, discard one another. And I'm so glad to have you, you know, as a comrade, leading these conversations on social media. We're going to see you on the other side of things. For those of you who are watching, thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to catch up on what's happening tomorrow on the final day of Planet AfroPunk Weekend. Shout out to Target for sponsoring. Thank you so much, George, for joining us. Y'all have a good evening.
Thank you.